At my husband's older sister's wedding, my son only took one piece of cake. Yet my mother-in-law slapped him so hard he fell down in front of all the guests. His innocent words immediately made the groom's family call off the wedding. It was a spectacular disaster that shattered the flawless image my in-laws had spent years carefully building. I was always treated as just the quiet wife, the remote bookkeeper who stayed in the background while they paraded around high society pretending to be wealthy. They thought I was broke and powerless. They thought they could abuse my child, and I would simply bow my head and take it. But what they did not know was that the very luxury resort they were standing in belonged entirely to me. And when my husband decided to take their side over our son, he triggered a chain of events that would leave his entire family destitute and begging for mercy. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth and tried to walk all over you. The sharp crack of flesh hitting flesh echoed through the grand ballroom, cutting through the elegant atmosphere like a gunshot. It was loud enough to completely halt the live jazz band playing in the corner. The cheerful chatter of 200 wealthy guests died instantly, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. I spun around, dropping my champagne glass. It shattered against the imported Italian marble floor, but I did not even hear the glass break. All I saw was my 6-year-old son Leo sprawling on the hard stone. Cake frosting was smeared down the front of his tiny tailored tuxedo jacket, and a bright, angry red handprint was already blistering across his left cheek. Standing over him, trembling with a terrifying mix of self-righteous rage and panic, was my mother-in-law Geraldine. I felt the air leave my lungs. For a split second, the entire world went completely numb. This was supposed to be the perfect evening, the merging of two families. Bianca, my entitled 28-year-old sister-in-law, was marrying Preston Davenport. The Davenports were old money. They were a powerful white family whose generational wealth controlled half the commercial real estate in the city. Geraldine had spent the last 2 years obsessing over this union, bending over backward to prove our family belonged in the exact same room as the Davenports. She served as the head of finances at our local church and acted like the absolute queen of the local black elite. But right now she was just a cruel woman who had struck a fragile child. My child. Before I could even cross the distance, Geraldine pointed a manicured finger at my boy. "I told you not to touch the VIP cake, you little brat," she hissed, her voice carrying all the way to the vaulted ceilings. I rushed forward, sliding to my knees and pulling Leo into my chest. He was gasping for air, his small shoulders shaking as he tried to process the physical pain and the sudden public humiliation. He had severe asthma, and sudden shocks like this could easily trigger a dangerous attack. I rubbed his back, whispering soothing words, trying to keep him calm. Geraldine did not stop. She glared down at me, her eyes filled with the exact same contempt she had shown me since the day Dion and I got married. "Your mother is nothing but a lowly bookkeeper," she yelled, losing all her carefully crafted sophistication. "She does not have the right to breathe the same air as the Davenports, let alone pay for a $5,000 custom dessert. You and this undisciplined child are ruining the most important night of my daughter's life." I could feel the stares of the wedding guests burning into my back. I held Leo tight, feeling his rapid, uneven heartbeat against mine. Dion, my husband of 7 years, was standing just a few feet away near a massive swan ice sculpture. He was a credit manager at a local bank and always loved playing the role of a big shot. He did not move a single muscle to help us. He just stood there holding his whiskey glass, watching his mother verbally and physically assault our son. He looked embarrassed by us, not for us. I looked up at Geraldine, the woman who attended church every single Sunday preaching about grace and family values. "You hit my son over a piece of sugar?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Geraldine scoffed, adjusting her expensive silk shawl. "That sugar costs more than you make in a month, Neela. You should be in the kitchen washing dishes, not mingling with our guests." You are an embarrassment to our family." Leo buried his face in my neck, but then he turned his head. His cheeks were wet with tears, but his eyes held a defiant spark that he definitely inherited from me. He took a deep breath, steadying his small chest. "But Grandma, you lied!" He shouted, his voice echoing clearly across the hushed ballroom. The guests gasped. Geraldine stepped back, her face paling instantly. "You said Daddy's money had to buy a diamond dress for Auntie Bianca, so I could not buy my asthma medicine this month." Leo cried out, his innocent voice piercing through the heavy tension. "You said we had to pretend to be rich for the white people." A collective murmur of shock ran through the crowd. I could see the Davenport family exchanging horrified looks. Geraldine opened her mouth to shout him down, but Leo was not finished. He pointed a small shaking finger at the polished floor. "And you said Mommy was a broke bookkeeper. But you are the broke one, Grandma, because this whole building belongs to my mommy, Nyla." Total, absolute silence descended upon the grand ballroom. You could have heard a pin drop. The string quartet players slowly lowered their instruments completely. Geraldine looked like she had been struck by lightning. She looked around frantically, trying to gauge the reaction of her wealthy peers. The facade she had spent decades building, the illusion of immense wealth and high-class sophistication, was crumbling into dust right before her eyes. She had drained my husband's bank accounts for years, forcing Dayon to steal from our own household savings just to fund Bianca's lavish lifestyle and this fake wedding display. I knew about the missing asthma medicine money. I had already paid for it myself from my private accounts, but hearing my son expose their financial abuse so publicly was a moment of pure poetic justice. The crowd parted as a woman stepped forward. It was Victoria Davenport Preston's mother. She was a woman of immense power and strict principles, wearing a simple but devastatingly expensive silver gown. Victoria did not tolerate nonsense, and she absolutely loathed cruelty and deception. She walked straight past a trembling Bianca, who was clutching her extravagant diamond-encrusted wedding dress, trying to look pitiful. Victoria stopped directly in front of Geraldine. The disgust on her face was palpable. She looked at the red mark on my son's cheek, and then at the smear of frosting on his suit. Then she looked back at Geraldine. "Is it true?" Victoria asked, her voice cold enough to freeze the entire room. "Did you deny this child his medical care to fund this circus?" Geraldine stammered, her hands shaking as she tried to reach out to Victoria. "Victoria, please, you must understand. Children tell tales, he is just confused. Nyla fills his head with nonsense because she is jealous of our success." Victoria cut her off, raising a single hand. "Do not insult my intelligence, Geraldine. I have overlooked your desperate social climbing for months because Preston loves Bianca. I overlooked the constant aggressive requests for our family to introduce you to our private social circle. I even overlooked the fact that you clearly could not afford this lifestyle. But I will not overlook child abuse. And I will certainly not align my family with people who steal from a sick child to buy a dress." Bianca rushed forward, grabbing Preston's arm. "Preston, baby, please do not listen to this. Nyla's kid is crazy. My mother would never do that. We are good people." Preston looked at his bride-to-be. He looked at the sheer desperation in her eyes, and then at the glaring red handprint on my son's face. He gently but firmly detached Bianca's hands from his arm. "I am sorry, Bianca," he said softly but firmly. "I cannot marry into a family that treats their own blood this way. My mother is right. This is over." Bianca let out a loud, dramatic wail, collapsing to her knees in the middle of the dance floor. Geraldine rushed to comfort her, completely ignoring the fact that she had just caused this entire disaster by striking my son. Victoria signaled to her husband and the rest of the Davenport family. "We are leaving," she announced. The mass exodus of the groom's side of the wedding was swift and orderly. Within minutes, half the ballroom was empty, leaving only Geraldine's church friends and our confused relatives whispering among themselves. The silence they left behind was deafening, broken only by Bianca's theatrical sobbing. I stood up, keeping Leo safely tucked against my side. I smoothed his hair and kissed his forehead, telling him how brave he was. I grabbed my purse from the nearest table, preparing to walk out the front doors of my own venue. I owned this luxury resort. It was one of 12 premium commercial properties in my portfolio. Dion and his family thought I was just a remote bookkeeper crunching numbers for small businesses. They had no idea I managed a massive real estate empire because I knew exactly how greedy and financially irresponsible they were. Years ago, I transitioned from a high-paying technology career into real estate investing, building my wealth quietly under corporate holding names. I kept my money hidden to protect my peace and to secure a safe future for my son. But that peace was entirely gone now. As I turned toward the exit, Dion finally moved. He marched across the marble floor, his face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. But he did not come to check on Leo. He did not come to see if his son was injured or traumatized by his grandmother's violence. He came straight toward me. "You stupid woman," Dion hissed. Before I could process his movement, he raised his hand and slapped me hard across the face. The impact snapped my head to the side. I tasted blood instantly as my teeth cut into my inner lip. "You taught this brat to ruin my sister's life," he yelled, pointing a finger in my face. "You are always jealous of Bianca. You are always trying to tear my mother down. You coached him to say those things, didn't you?" I slowly turned my head back to look at the man I had married. The man who had just struck me in defense of the people who abused our child. I did not cry. I did not scream. I felt a cold, absolute clarity wash over my entire being. The last remaining shred of love I held for him vanished completely, replaced by a chilling resolve. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand. I adjusted my hold on Leo, making sure he was secure against my hip. "You just signed your own death warrant, Dion," I said, my voice dead calm. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. With 3 quick taps, I logged into the master administrative portal for our joint banking accounts. The accounts that held the funds he used to pay for his daily life, his fancy car and his mother's constant financial demands. I locked them all. Every single credit card, every checking account, every savings line was instantly frozen. I looked him dead in the eye as the confirmation flashed on my screen. "Good luck paying the cancellation fee for the caterers tonight," I whispered, "because your cards will decline in about 5 minutes. And by tomorrow morning, you are going to wish you never laid hands on me or my son." The drive away from the venue took exactly 42 minutes, and every single second of that journey felt like shedding a heavy, suffocating skin. I sat in the back of my private car with Leo resting his tired head against my chest. His breathing had finally returned to a steady rhythm after I administered his backup inhaler. The angry red mark on his cheek was already beginning to fade, but the memory of that stinging sound would be burned into my mind forever. I looked out the window at the passing streetlights, feeling a profound sense of clarity. For 7 years, I had made myself small. I had hidden my success, my assets, and my power just to make a weak man feel tall. I had tolerated his mother's endless insults and his sister's ridiculous demands because I believed in keeping the peace. But the moment Geraldine raised her hand to my child, that peace was permanently broken. The car pulled up to our residence, which was a sprawling luxury penthouse in the center of the city. Dion had always bragged to his friends about the incredible deal he negotiated on the lease. He truly believed his modest bank salary was keeping a roof over our heads. He never bothered to read the actual property documents. He never realized that the management company collecting his monthly rent checks was merely a subsidiary of a real estate trust that I entirely controlled. He was paying rent to his own wife while strutting around like the king of the castle. I carried Leo inside and tucked him into his bed, pulling the heavy comforter up to his chin. I stood in the doorway of his room for a long time, just watching his chest rise and fall. Once I was absolutely sure he was in a deep sleep, I walked down the hall to the master bedroom and pulled a large leather travel bag from the top of my closet. I was not packing to run away. I was packing to move my personal items into the guest suite because I refused to share a room with Dion for even one more night. I had only folded 3 shirts when the front doors of the penthouse burst open downstairs. The heavy wooden doors slammed violently against the entryway walls, echoing through the quiet space. Loud, aggressive footsteps stomped across the hardwood floor and made their way up the floating glass staircase. I did not stop packing. I did not even look up when Dayon appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, his chest heaving with exertion. Right behind him stood Geraldine, still wearing her extravagant and completely unpaid for designer gown. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. And trailing closely behind them, looking incredibly uncomfortable, but attempting to project a sense of moral superiority, was Pastor Miller from their local church. Sister Nyla. Pastor Miller began, his voice dripping with that practiced pastoral condescension. We need to sit down and have a prayerful conversation about the terrible disruption you caused tonight. Marriage and family require grace, and what happened at that venue was a severe departure from the Lord's path. Geraldine violently shoved past the pastor before I could even formulate a response. Grace is for people who know their proper place. She screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. You ruined the most important night in the history of this family. You humiliated us in front of the Davenports. You are a complete disgrace to Black women everywhere. You have always been nothing but a jealous, bitter little bookkeeper who could not stand the fact that Bianca snagged a wealthy white man. You could not bear to see my daughter elevate this family into high society, so you used your spoiled brat of a son to sabotage everything. I carefully folded another sweater and placed it into my bag. My silence only seemed to infuriate her more. Dan stepped forward, trying to puff out his chest and play the role of the authoritative husband. You need to listen to my mother, Nyla, he demanded. You are going to fix this mess. You are going to call Victoria Davenport right now and tell her that you are suffering from a mental breakdown and that Leo made up those lies because you coached him. And then you are going to pay the $200,000 cancellation fee for the venue and the caterers. You are going to drain whatever pathetic little savings account you have, and you are going to compensate my sister for destroying her dream wedding. I slowly zipped my travel bag closed and turned to face the three of them. I looked at Dion, whose tailored suit was still slightly wrinkled from the scuffle at the venue. I looked at Geraldine, whose chest was heaving with righteous indignation. And finally, I looked at Pastor Miller, who was clutching his leather-bound Bible as if it could somehow protect him from the reality of the situation. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice even a fraction of a decibel. I walked over to my bedside table and opened the locked bottom drawer. I pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it onto the bed right in front of Pastor Miller. Compensation. I asked, my voice perfectly steady and ice cold. Pastor Miller, before we discuss me compensating anyone, I think you need to look at those highlighted bank statements. Did you know that your devoted head of church finances just siphoned $50,000 directly from the Youth Outreach Charity Fund? Pastor Miller froze. The pastoral concern melted from his face, instantly replaced by sheer panic. He reached out with trembling hands and picked up the stack of papers. I took a step closer to him, making sure he heard every single word. If you look at page 3, you will see a withdrawal made exactly 4 days ago. And if you look at page 4, you will see that exact same amount deposited into a secondary checking account belonging to my husband. That money was then immediately wired to an exotic car rental service in Atlanta to secure a fleet of white Bentleys for the wedding party today. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. I froze all of Dion's credit cards about an hour ago. So I am terribly curious, Pastor. How exactly does Geraldine plan to replace that stolen charity money before your Sunday morning audit? Geraldine lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers out of the pastor's hands. It was a temporary loan, she shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. It was just a misunderstanding. I was going to put it all back as soon as Bianca and Preston opened their wedding gifts. You have no right to look into my church business, you meddling witch. But Pastor Miller was no longer listening to her. He was staring at the routing numbers and the signature authorizations printed clearly on the pages. The realization that he was standing in a room with people who had embezzled from his congregation hit him like a physical blow. He clutched the papers to his chest and began backing away toward the bedroom door. Sister Geraldine, he stammered, his voice shaking. This is fraud. This is a severe criminal offense. I will be calling an emergency board meeting first thing tomorrow morning, and we will be contacting the local authorities if these funds are not returned in full immediately." He did not wait for her to offer another excuse. He turned and practically sprinted down the hallway and down the stairs, his heavy footsteps echoing as he fled the penthouse. The heavy front door slammed shut behind him, leaving the three of us standing in a suffocating silence. The false religious shield they had tried to use against me had completely evaporated. With the pastor gone and their financial crimes exposed, Dion completely lost his mind. His false bravado shattered, giving way to the frantic desperation of a cornered animal. He took 2 aggressive steps toward me, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "You think you are so smart?" He spat saliva flying from his lips. "You think you can just destroy my mother and ruin my sister, and I am just going to let you walk away? I am going to destroy your life, Nyla. I am calling the best family lawyers in this city tomorrow morning. I am filing for full custody of Leo. I will stand before a judge and swear under oath that you are mentally unstable. I will tell the court that you fabricated stories and caused public scenes that endangered the welfare of my son. You are going to lose your child, and you are going to be out on the street with nothing." I looked at him and I genuinely smiled. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey step willingly into a trap. "Call them," I whispered. "Call every single lawyer in the city, Dion. File the custody papers. Tell the judge whatever lies you want to invent. But I highly suggest you make those phone calls from the sidewalk." Dion laughed, a harsh, grating sound that bounced off the bedroom walls. "The sidewalk," he mocked, shaking his head, as if I was the one losing my mind. "I am the man of this house, Nyla. I pay the rent here. You are the one who is going to be packing your bags and walking out the front door." I tilted my head, studying the utter ignorance radiating from him. "You pay a monthly transfer into a shell corporation named Apex Holdings, Dion." I said my words slow and deliberate. "Did you ever bother to look up who owns Apex Holdings? Did you ever wonder why the lease agreement you signed was so incredibly favorable? Your name was never on the deed to this property. You have absolutely no equity here. You are nothing but a month-to-month tenant, and considering you just laid hands on the actual owner of the building, your lease has been officially terminated." Before Dion could even open his mouth to argue the logistics of my claim, I reached into my pocket and pressed the small, silent panic button attached to my keychain. I had hired a premium private security firm 2 weeks ago when I first suspected Dion was hiding severe debts. They had been parked in an unmarked SUV at the end of our street waiting for my signal. Less than 30 seconds later, the heavy front doors downstairs opened again. Heavy tactical boots marched up the glass staircase. 2 massive security contractors dressed in dark suits appeared in the bedroom doorway. They did not ask questions. They did not wait for an explanation. They looked directly at me, awaiting my command. "These 2 individuals are trespassing," I said, pointing at my husband and my mother-in-law. "Remove them from my property immediately." Dion tried to puff his chest out again, turning to confront the guards. "You cannot touch me," he yelled. "I live here. This is my wife." The larger of the 2 guards simply reached forward, grabbed Dion by the collar of his ruined suit, and physically lifted him off his feet. Dion thrashed and cursed, but he was completely overpowered in seconds. The second guard clamped a massive hand onto Geraldine's arm. She shrieked in absolute terror, thrashing wildly as her expensive stolen gown tore against the doorframe. "You cannot do this to us!" Geraldine screamed, her voice echoing down the hallway as they dragged her toward the stairs. "We are your family. You are a monster, Nyla. You are going to burn in hell for this." I stood at the top of the staircase and watched as the guards hauled them down the steps and shoved them out the front door. The guard stepped back inside and pulled the heavy doors shut, sealing the penthouse and locking the deadbolts with a satisfying series of clicks. The silence that washed over the house was beautiful. I walked back into my bedroom, picked up my travel bag, and finally allowed myself to breathe. The ambush was over, but the real war was only just beginning. The heavy doors clicked shut and the silence was beautiful. But the real war was just beginning. I knew my husband and his mother well enough to understand that they would not simply walk away and accept defeat. Dayon was a man whose entire identity was wrapped up in a false sense of superiority. He honestly believed he was the king of our castle simply because I had allowed him to wear a paper crown. Now that I had stripped him of his access to my money and humiliated him in front of his precious mother, I knew he would retaliate using the only thing he thought he could leverage against me, our son. I spent the next 48 hours securing my fortress. I arranged for Leo to stay home from school playing video games and eating his favorite snacks under the watchful eye of my trusted nanny and a rotation of private security guards. I did not shed a single tear over the end of my marriage. The man I had married died a long time ago, replaced by a greedy, shallow stranger who valued his sister's vanity over his own child's health. I sat in my home office sipping black coffee and meticulously preparing my legal strategy. I did not need to hire a high-priced divorce attorney to fight my battles. Before I became a real estate mogul, I spent years analyzing financial law and corporate structuring. I knew exactly how to dismantle Dion brick by miserable brick. The knock on my door came on Tuesday morning. A nervous-looking process server handed me a thick stack of legal documents. Dion had filed an emergency petition for sole custody of Leo. As I read through the motion, a cold laugh escaped my lips. Dion had hired a notoriously cheap, aggressive lawyer who advertised on local billboards. The petition claimed I had suffered a severe psychotic break. It accused me of being an unfit and abusive mother, stating that I had violently disrupted a peaceful family gathering and brainwashed our son into telling malicious lies. Dion was demanding immediate physical custody of Leo and requesting exclusive occupancy of the penthouse, arguing that his stable income as a bank credit manager was the only thing keeping our family afloat. He truly believed his own lies. He had lived in my shadow for so long that he actually thought he was the one casting it. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at the county family court. I arrived wearing a tailored navy blue suit, my hair pulled back into a sleek bun. I carried no designer bags and wore no flashy jewelry. I simply carried a single black leather briefcase. As I walked down the fluorescent-lit hallway toward the assigned courtroom, I spotted them. Dion, Geraldine, and Bianca were standing near the double doors, looking like a pack of hyenas waiting for a wounded gazelle. Dion was wearing a poorly fitted gray suit, his posture dripping with unearned arrogance. Geraldine had her arms crossed, glaring at me with undisguised venom. And Bianca, the supposed heartbroken bride, was wearing a pair of designer sunglasses indoors and holding a luxury handbag that I knew for a fact she could never afford on her own. Bianca stepped right into my path, blocking my way to the courtroom doors. She lowered her sunglasses, sneering at me with absolute contempt. "You are going to lose your kid and your home, Nyla," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet hallway. "We have Dion's income statements. We have the tax returns. My brother makes $85,000 a year, and everyone knows you just do part-time bookkeeping from your laptop. He pays for absolutely everything. You are nothing without him, and the judge is going to see exactly how crazy you really are." I looked at Bianca, taking in her smug expression and the expensive jewelry glittering on her wrists. I did not raise my voice. I did not show her even a fraction of the anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. "Bianca," I said softly, "I suggest you take a very good look at that handbag you are holding, because it is going to be the last nice thing you ever own." Dion stepped forward, puffing out his chest and trying to look intimidating. "Do not talk to my sister, you crazy witch," he spat. "My lawyer is going to tear you apart in there. You do not even have an attorney with you. You are going to walk out of this building with absolutely nothing." I smiled, stepping smoothly around them and pushing open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. "We will see about that, Dion." The courtroom was cold and smelled of floor wax and old paper. Judge Morrison, a stern-looking woman with graying hair and zero patience for nonsense, presided over the hearing. Dion's cheap lawyer, a sweating man named Mr. Vance, immediately launched into a theatrical opening statement. He paced back and forth, painting a tragic picture of Dion as a hard-working, dedicated father who was desperately trying to protect his son from a mentally unstable mother. He claimed my bookkeeping business was failing and that I had become dangerously erratic, culminating in what he called a violently unhinged outburst at Bianca's wedding. Your Honor, Mr. Vance said, gesturing dramatically toward Dion. My client is a respected credit manager at a major local bank. He is the sole financial provider for this family. The mother is unemployed, relying entirely on my client's generous income. She has shown a shocking pattern of emotional instability and child endangerment. We are asking for immediate sole legal and physical custody to protect the minor child. Judge Morrison peered over her reading glasses, her expression neutral. She then called Bianca to the witness stand to testify about the wedding incident. Bianca practically glided to the stand, performing the role of the traumatized victim perfectly. She squeezed out fake tears as she swore under oath that I had physically abused Leo and forced him to ruin her perfect day out of pure spite and jealousy. She claimed Dion was a saint who worked tirelessly to provide me with a luxurious lifestyle that I completely took for granted. When it was my turn to cross-examine her, I stood up from my table holding my black briefcase. I approached the podium with calm, measured steps. Bianca, you just testified under oath that your brother is the sole financial provider for our household, and that he works tirelessly to support his family. Is that correct, I asked? Yes. Bianca sniffed, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. He pays for everything while you just sit at home. I nodded slowly. And this luxurious lifestyle you mentioned, you consider yourself quite familiar with your brother's financial capabilities. Of course, she replied, her voice dripping with arrogance. He is a successful bank manager. He takes care of his family. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of certified financial documents. I handed a copy to the court bailiff to pass to Judge Morrison and another copy to a suddenly very pale Mr. Vance. I kept the original in my hand, turning my attention back to the judge. Your Honor, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the quiet courtroom. My husband claims to be the stable financial provider for our child. He claims to make $85,000 a year, which he does. However, what he has failed to disclose to this court is his spending habits. According to these certified bank statements and tax filings, Dion Wilson spends upwards of $200,000 a year. Judge Morrison frowned, flipping through the pages. Where is the additional money coming from, Mrs. Wilson? I looked directly at Dion, who was beginning to sweat through his cheap suit. That is a wonderful question, Your Honor. It appears my husband has been living a double life. To maintain the illusion of extreme wealth for his mother and his sister, he has been systematically draining every joint account we possess. But when those ran dry, he resorted to extreme measures. I pulled another document from my briefcase. 3 months ago, my husband secretly took out $150,000 in predatory high-interest loans. He used these loans to purchase custom diamond jewelry, a luxury car lease, and first-class vacations entirely for his sister Bianca. Bianca gripped the edges of the witness stand, her fake tears completely vanishing. That is a lie, she snapped. Dion bought those things with his bonuses. I ignored her and focused on the judge. The problem, Your Honor, is that a bank manager making $85,000 a year cannot qualify for $150,000 in unsecured predatory loans, unless, of course, he commits fraud. I handed the next document to the bailiff. My husband forged my signature, acting as a fraudulent guarantor on every single one of those loans. He used my personal Social Security number and my business credentials to secure dirty money for his sister's vanity. Mr. Vance jumped to his feet, his face red. Objection, Your Honor. These documents are unverified. My client denies these baseless accusations. They are certified copies directly from the lending institutions, I replied calmly. And I can assure you they are very real. But the most interesting part of this financial tragedy is who currently holds the debt. I turned to look at Dion and Geraldine. Geraldine was sitting in the gallery, clutching her purse, her mouth hanging slightly open. Dion looked like he was going to be sick right there at the plaintiff's table. You see, Your Honor, I continued, pacing slowly in front of the stand. When someone defaults on high-interest predatory loans, those accounts are typically sold off to private debt collection agencies for pennies on the dollar. My husband has not made a single payment on these loans in over 90 days. The original lenders sold his massive debt to a private collection agency just last week. I pulled the final and most devastating document from my briefcase. I slid it across the table toward Dion's lawyer while speaking directly to the judge. The debt collection agency that currently holds my husband's $150,000 fraudulent loan is called Obsidian Financial. And if you look at the corporate structuring documents I just provided, you will see that Obsidian Financial is a subsidiary corporation owned entirely by my blind trust. The courtroom went dead silent. The only sound was the rustling of paper as Judge Morrison quickly scanned the corporate ownership documents. She looked up at me and then glared down at Dion. "Let me be perfectly clear, Your Honor," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "I am not an unemployed bookkeeper. I am the founder and sole owner of a commercial real estate and financial holdings empire. My husband has spent the last 7 years living rent-free in a penthouse that I own. He has driven cars that I paid for. And when he decided to steal money to fund his sister's fake high society wedding, he unknowingly borrowed that money from me. My husband cannot afford to raise a child. My husband cannot even afford to buy a cup of coffee without my permission. He is a financial fraud, a thief, and a liar." Dion stood up, knocking his chair backward. "It was a setup," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She set me up, Judge. She tricked me into taking those loans." Judge Morrison slammed her gavel down so hard the sound cracked like a whip. "Sit down, Mr. Wilson," she barked, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "You will remain silent or I will hold you in contempt." Dion slumped back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Bianca looked like she was hyperventilating on the witness stand, finally realizing that the luxury items she had been parading around town were essentially stolen goods. Geraldine sat in the gallery, completely paralyzed by the revelation that the daughter-in-law she had treated like garbage was actually the millionaire she had been desperately trying to pretend to be. Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses, looking down at Dion with pure disgust. "Mr. Wilson, you came into my courtroom requesting emergency custody of a minor child, claiming you were the stable provider. Instead, what I have before me is overwhelming evidence of severe financial fraud, identity theft, and gross irresponsibility. You forged your wife's signature to take out predatory loans to fund a wedding. That does not demonstrate stability. That demonstrates a reckless disregard for your family's future and a complete lack of moral character." She picked up her pen and began writing decisively on the order forms. "I am dismissing your emergency petition for custody immediately. Furthermore, based on the evidence of fraudulent activity and financial instability presented today, I am stripping you of all physical and legal custody rights pending a full investigation. You will be granted supervised visitation only at a state-approved facility, and you will be responsible for all costs associated with that supervision." "But, Your Honor!" Mr. Vance tried to interject, his voice weak and defeated. "I am not finished," Judge Morrison snapped. "Mrs. Wilson retains full exclusive use of the marital residence. Mr. Wilson, you are ordered to stay at least 500 yards away from the petitioner and the minor child outside of approved supervised visits. And if I were you, Mr. Wilson, I would seek criminal counsel because I am forwarding these forged loan documents directly to the district attorney's office. We are adjourned." The sharp crack of the gavel signaled the absolute end of Dion's miserable attempt to take my son. I packed my documents back into my briefcase, snapping the golden clasps shut with a satisfying click. I did not gloat. I did not taunt them. I simply turned and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, feeling the furious, terrified stares of my in-laws burning into my back. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the bright sunlight of the courthouse steps. The warm Atlanta air felt refreshing against my skin. I took a deep breath, savoring the taste of absolute victory. But before I could even walk down the steps, the heavy doors burst open behind me. Dion, Geraldine, and Bianca stormed out of the courthouse looking like a chaotic mess of ruined lives. Geraldine was crying loud, dramatic sobs while clutching Dion's arm. Bianca was screaming at her brother, demanding to know how he could be so stupid to get caught. Dion was just staring at the ground, looking like a man marching to his own execution. "You think you won, Nyla?" Geraldine screamed, spotting me at the top of the stairs. "You think this is over? We will appeal. We will tell everyone what a vindictive, evil woman you are. You destroyed this family." I did not even bother turning around to face her. I just kept walking down the wide concrete steps, my heels clicking rhythmically. As I reached the bottom step, a massive black stretch limousine pulled smoothly up to the courthouse curb. The tinted windows gleamed in the sunlight, and the sheer luxury of the vehicle commanded immediate attention. Bianca stopped screaming at her brother. Her tear-streaked face suddenly lit up with a desperate manic hope. She smoothed down her designer skirt and pushed past her mother, running down the courthouse steps. Preston, Bianca cried out, her voice dripping with fake relief. "Oh my God, Preston, you came back for me. I knew you would not let that misunderstanding ruin our love. I knew you would come." The rear door of the limousine opened. Preston Davenport stepped out onto the sidewalk, looking impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit. His expression was completely unreadable. Bianca threw her arms open, running toward him, expecting a romantic movie reunion. But Preston did not even look at her. He completely ignored his former bride, stepping smoothly out of her path so that she stumbled awkwardly on the pavement. He did not spare a single glance for Dayon or Geraldine, who were watching in stunned silence from the top of the stairs. Instead, Preston walked straight up to me, stopping just 2 feet away. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope, holding it out toward me. "My mother sent me," he said, his voice carrying clearly up the stairs so that my ruined in-laws could hear every single word. "She said you and she share a common enemy, and she believes it is time the two of you had a private conversation about completely destroying them." The heavy courthouse doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the chaotic sounds of Dion, Geraldine, and Bianca arguing on the steps. I did not wait to see what they would do next. The morning sun was bright, the air already warm with the promise of an Atlanta summer. I walked toward the street, my black briefcase swinging gently at my side, feeling lighter than I had in years. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. I heard the rapid clicking of heels behind me before I saw her. Nyla. Bianca's voice was shrill, tinged with a desperation I had never heard from her before. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Wait!" she demanded, her eyes darting around the courthouse plaza as if looking for an audience. "You have to fix this. You have to tell the judge you made a mistake. Dion cannot go to jail. We will lose everything." I stopped and looked down at her hand, still clutching my sleeve. "Remove your hand, Bianca," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. She snatched it back but did not retreat. "You do not understand," she pleaded, tears welling in her perfectly made-up eyes. "Preston will not return my calls. His family is ignoring us. If you just go back inside and tell them it was all a misunderstanding, we can work this out. Dion will pay you back. We will all pay you back." I almost laughed. "Pay me back," I echoed. "With what money, Bianca? The money Dion stole from my accounts? Or the fraudulent loans he took out in my name? Your entire life is a facade built on my credit score. There is nothing left to fix." Before she could respond, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb directly in front of us. The tinted back window rolled down, revealing the elegant, steely face of Victoria Davenport. She did not look at Bianca. Her gaze was fixed entirely on me. "Nyla," Victoria said, her tone carrying the unmistakable weight of old money and absolute authority. "Please get in. We have matters to discuss." Bianca's face lit up with sudden manic hope. "Mrs. Davenport," she cried, stepping forward. "Thank God. Please tell Preston it was all a terrible mistake. My brother is just going through a difficult time, but we love him and—" Victoria cut her off with a single dismissive wave of her hand, not even bothering to look at my sister-in-law. "Miss Wilson, your presence is not required. My business is with Nyla." Bianca froze, her mouth opening and closing silently. I did not hesitate. I opened the car door and slid into the cool leather interior, taking the seat opposite Victoria. Preston was sitting beside his mother, his expression as unreadable as ever. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving Bianca standing alone on the sidewalk, her entire world crumbling around her. The interior of the car was silent for a long moment, save for the hum of the engine and the muted sounds of the city outside. Victoria sat perfectly straight, her hands resting elegantly on her lap. She looked me over, assessing me with the same sharp intelligence I recognized in myself. "I must admit, Nyla," she began, finally breaking the silence, "I am impressed. Not many people could dismantle a fraudulent family dynamic with such surgical precision. Your performance in court today was quite illuminating. I did not perform, Victoria, I replied evenly. I simply presented facts. Facts my husband and his family spent years trying to suppress. Preston leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. We know, Nyla. We know everything. Victoria reached into an embossed leather briefcase resting beside her and pulled out a thick, heavily tabbed dossier. She placed it on the seat between us. The Davenport family does not enter into any significant relationship, whether personal or financial, without conducting a thorough background check. We are protective of our legacy, and unfortunately, your in-laws presented several red flags early on in Preston's courtship with Bianca. I looked at the dossier, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. You investigated them, I asked. We investigated everyone connected to Bianca, Victoria confirmed. And what we found was a desperate, socially climbing family drowning in debt and actively seeking a lifeline. Geraldine was not just planning a wedding, Nyla. She was orchestrating a massive investment scam. They intended to leverage the Davenport name to legitimize a fake real estate venture targeting Atlanta's wealthy elite. They needed our credibility to steal millions. She tapped the cover of the dossier. But what surprised me most was not their pathetic attempt at fraud. It was you. While investigating Dion's wildly inconsistent financial records, our analysts stumbled upon a network of highly sophisticated holding companies and blind trusts. It took considerable effort to pierce the corporate veil, but when we did, we found the actual owner of the city's largest commercial real estate syndicate. Victoria met my eyes, her gaze piercing. A syndicate quietly operating right under the noses of Atlanta's biggest developers, owned entirely by a woman playing the role of a modest remote bookkeeper. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I built my empire quietly because I understood early on the danger of letting greedy people know your true worth, I said simply. Dion and his mother proved my instincts correct. Preston spoke up, his voice lacking the usual polished charm. They used you, just like they tried to use me. Bianca never loved me. She loved the access my name provided. Dion thought he could use his position at the bank to launder the investment funds, and Geraldine wanted the social glory. Victoria nodded, picking up the thread. We were prepared to expose them before the wedding, but your son's unfortunate intervention accelerated the timeline. Which brings us to why you are sitting in this car. She leaned back, observing me carefully. Geraldine and Dion may be publicly humiliated, but they are not finished. People like them do not simply accept defeat. They will attempt to spin this narrative. They will try to cast you as the villain and themselves as victims of a vindictive, mentally unstable woman. They need to secure new funding sources quickly to avoid total ruin, and they will use any lie necessary to do so. I know, I said, resting my hand on my briefcase. Dion's lawyers are already drafting statements to that effect. Victoria smiled, a small, sharp expression that held no warmth. We have a mutual interest in ensuring they never see another dime of innocent money and that they face the full consequences of their actions. You possess the internal banking records, the proof of Dion's fraudulent loan approvals. We possess the political and social influence to ensure those records are seen by the right federal authorities, not just a local judge. She was offering an alliance, the old money power of the Davenports combined with the quiet financial dominance I had built. Together we could obliterate whatever remained of Dion and Geraldine's schemes. I unclasped my briefcase and pulled out a sealed flash drive, placing it next to Victoria's dossier. This drive contains encrypted copies of every internal memo, loan approval, and wire transfer Dion authorized for his mother's socialite friends over the last 3 years. He bypassed standard underwriting procedures to funnel bank funds directly into Geraldine's church charity accounts, which she then used as her personal piggy bank. Victoria picked up the flash drive, her eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. This is exactly what we need. The Federal Banking Commission will have a field day. Dion will not just lose his job, he will face federal prison time. And Geraldine? I asked. Preston answered, his jaw set. My mother has already informed the church board of directors about the missing funds. They are initiating an independent audit tomorrow. Once the shortfall is officially documented, they will have no choice but to press charges. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the weight of our shared strategy settling over the car. I had spent years protecting myself, quietly deflecting their abuse and shielding my son. Now I was going on the offensive, and I had the most powerful allies in the city backing me up. The car pulled up to the entrance of my building. Not the penthouse Dion thought he controlled, but a highly secure luxury condominium complex I owned under a different LLC. I gathered my briefcase, preparing to step out. "Nyla," Victoria said, stopping me with a hand on my arm. "I am sorry about what happened to your son at the wedding. No child should ever endure that. If you need anything, medical specialist, security recommendations, please let us know." "Thank you, Victoria," I said, genuinely meaning it. "Leo is safe and he is strong. We are going to be fine." I stepped out of the car, the humid Atlanta air wrapping around me as the sedan glided away. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. It was an electronic invitation forwarded from a society mailing list. The ornate gold lettering on the digital card announced the Geraldine Wilson Foundation inaugural charity gala, to be held this coming Saturday at the Grand Marquis Hotel. The invitation promised an evening of elegance and philanthropy, hosted by Atlanta's most dedicated community leader. I stared at the screen, a cold laugh bubbling up in my throat. The sheer audacity was staggering. Ignorant of the federal investigation Victoria and I had just launched. Ignorant of the church audit beginning tomorrow, Geraldine was doubling down. She was throwing a lavish save-face gala, pretending her life was not collapsing, attempting to scam the very people she claimed to lead. And she was using a high-end venue she absolutely could not afford. The Grand Marquis Hotel was notoriously expensive, demanding hefty deposits up front. A deposit I knew she did not have unless she had stolen it. I forwarded the invitation to Victoria with a single sentence attached. "Saturday night at the Grand Marquis. Let us give them a show they will never forget." The trap was set. Geraldine was walking willingly into the spotlight, blind to the absolute darkness waiting to consume her. She wanted an audience. She wanted a stage to perform her final act of deception. I was going to make sure it was a performance the city would talk about for decades. The week leading up to the gala was a masterclass in silent warfare. Victoria Davenport and I moved through the city like shadows, dismantling the Wilson family brick by brick. We sat in the private study of the Davenport estate, sipping dark roast coffee, while her team of forensic accountants tore through the encrypted flash drive I had provided. The files contained everything. Dion had deliberately bypassed the bank's internal security protocols to approve massive unsecured loans for his mother's friends. He had funneled thousands of dollars into dummy accounts disguised as church outreach programs. Victoria watched the data populate on her massive monitor, her lips curving into a smile that was both elegant and terrifying. We had the evidence to send Dion to federal prison, and we had the financial records to prove Geraldine was nothing but a common thief stealing from the very congregation she claimed to serve. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy, humid heat that settled over the city like a thick wool blanket. The Grand Marquis Hotel was a beacon of old-world opulence, boasting massive crystal chandeliers and imported silk drapery. Geraldine had somehow managed to manipulate a vendor into securing the grand ballroom for her save-face charity gala. She was banking on the generous donations of Atlanta's elite to retroactively cover the massive costs she had incurred. She was playing a dangerous game of financial roulette, and she had absolutely no idea that the house always wins. I stood in the shadows of the mezzanine, overlooking the expansive ballroom floor. Victoria Davenport stood beside me, wearing a devastatingly elegant emerald gown that radiated generational wealth. We watched the pathetic circus unfold below us. Geraldine was parading around the room in a completely unpaid-for designer gown, dripping in rented diamonds that she fully intended to claim were stolen by the end of the night. Bianca followed closely behind her mother, wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously like a backup wedding gown. They were smiling and waving, playing the perfect aristocratic hostesses for a room full of people they were actively trying to scam. Dion was lingering near the open bar, playing the role of the successful but heartbroken brother and devoted father. He was wearing a brand new tuxedo, holding a glass of expensive scotch, and looking incredibly pleased with himself. He truly believed he had outsmarted me. He thought the locked doors of the penthouse and the brutal dismissal in family court were just temporary setbacks. He thought his mother's gala would restore their social standing and bring in enough cash to bury their debts. I watched as Geraldine approached a group of wealthy church members. These were the exact same people whose charity funds she had embezzled just days prior. She rested a manicured hand on her chest, looking appropriately tragic. My daughter-in-law had a severe mental breakdown, so we had to institutionalize her. Geraldine told the group, her voice carrying up to where I stood. It has been an absolute tragedy for our family. Poor Dion is raising little Leo all alone while trying to manage his demanding career. We are just doing everything we can to support him during this incredibly dark time. The church members murmured their sympathetic condolences, completely unaware that the woman speaking to them was a criminal who had stolen their hard-earned donations. They patted her arm and offered prayers for her strength. It was a sickening display of manipulation, and I felt a cold surge of adrenaline course through my veins. Victoria leaned toward me, her expression hardening into a mask of pure aristocratic disdain. "It is time to end this, Nyla," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of a judge delivering a final sentence. I nodded, signaling that the private security team we had stationed near the service elevators. I smoothed my hands over the skirt of my breathtaking crimson gown. It was a custom piece that projected absolute power and unbothered grace. I walked down the sweeping marble staircase with Victoria Davenport flanking my right side. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open simultaneously, pushed by two of my security contractors. The sheer force of our entrance caused a ripple of movement near the back of the room. Heads began to turn. The cheerful chatter of the gala slowly died away, replaced by a creeping, suffocating silence. Geraldine froze mid-sentence, her champagne glass hovering near her lips. Bianca dropped her cocktail napkin, her eyes wide with shock. Dion spilled his scotch down the front of his new tuxedo jacket as he stared at me in absolute disbelief. I did not walk toward them. I walked straight toward the elevated stage at the front of the ballroom, where a live band was softly playing jazz. The musicians saw the look on my face and the imposing presence of Victoria Davenport, and they immediately stopped playing. I stepped up onto the stage and walked directly to the DJ booth. I reached out and grabbed the microphone from the stand. The sharp screech of audio feedback pierced the quiet room, making several guests cover their ears. I looked down at the sea of wealthy guests and then fixed my gaze entirely on my mother-in-law. "Dearest mother-in-law," I said, my voice echoing loudly across the vaulted ceilings, "you throw a truly beautiful party. The floral arrangements are stunning and the champagne flows endlessly. There is just one tiny problem with your luxurious event. You forgot to pay the venue deposit." A loud collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Geraldine turned an unhealthy shade of gray, her rented diamonds trembling against her collarbone as she realized her entire facade was collapsing in front of the most powerful people in the city. "And unfortunately for you, Geraldine," I continued, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy, "that is the least of your problems tonight. The police are waiting right outside those double doors to arrest you for defrauding the church." Absolute chaos erupted in the ballroom. The wealthy church members Geraldine had just been speaking to began shouting in confusion and anger, connecting the dots between their missing charity funds and the extravagant party they were currently attending. Bianca let out a loud, dramatic shriek, collapsing onto a nearby banquet table and covering her face with her hands. Dion lost his mind entirely, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage and panic. He realized his entire life was imploding, and he desperately needed to stop me from speaking. He charged toward the stage, his heavy footsteps thudding against the polished dance floor. "Shut off that microphone, Nyla," he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Someone cut her microphone right now." He leaped onto the stage, reaching out to physically silence me, just as he had always tried to do in our marriage. He wanted to drag me away and force me back into the quiet, obedient box he had built for me. But I did not flinch, and I did not step back. I stood my ground, holding the microphone and watching him rush toward his own destruction. Before Dion could even close the distance between us, the massive projector screen behind me suddenly flickered to life. It had been set up to play a heartwarming slideshow of Geraldine's supposed charity work to encourage more donations. Instead, high-definition security footage illuminated the entire ballroom, casting a harsh white light over the shocked guests. The video clearly showed Dion standing in a dimly lit hotel hallway. He was aggressively and intimately kissing a woman, pressing her against the wall of the corridor with undeniable passion. The footage was crystal clear and undeniable. The woman turned her face toward the camera for a split second as they moved toward a hotel room door. A wave of horrified murmurs washed over the crowd as every single person in the ballroom recognized the woman on the massive screen. It was Bianca's maid of honor. The massive projector screen bathed the entire grand ballroom in a harsh, flickering white light. There on the display intended for a heartwarming slideshow of charity work was Dion. My supposedly devoted husband, the man who had just tried to portray himself as a heartbroken victim, was pressing a woman against the floral wallpaper of a cheap hotel corridor. The timestamp blinking in the bottom corner of the security footage proved this was from the night of the rehearsal dinner. The room was so overwhelmingly silent that you could hear the soft, mechanical whir of the projector cooling fan. Bianca stood frozen in the center of the dance floor, her eyes wide behind her rented diamonds. Her mind was desperately trying to process the visual evidence playing out 20 feet tall in front of her. The woman on the screen turned her face toward the camera for a split second as Dion kissed her neck, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was Bianca's maid of honor. Bianca slowly turned her head toward the woman in question, who was currently dropping her champagne glass and edging toward the nearest emergency exit, her face flushed dark with guilt. Then Bianca looked back at the massive screen, and the realization hit her like a runaway freight train. The secret loans, the missing money, the lavish gifts. Dion had not ruined his financial life solely to give his sister her dream wedding. He had been heavily siphoning those fraudulent funds to finance a secret double life with her absolute best friend. A guttural scream ripped from Bianca's throat. It was not a delicate society cry, but a feral shriek of pure, unadulterated humiliation and rage. She did not care about her elegant white backup wedding gown or the wealthy church members watching her every move. She lunged across the polished dance floor, her manicured hands curled into vicious claws. She completely bypassed me and tackled the maid of honor straight to the ground. The two women crashed violently into a banquet table, sending a towering crystal champagne fountain shattering across the imported Italian marble floor. Dion scrambled off the stage, his heavy footsteps thudding loudly as he tried to pull his sister away, but Bianca immediately turned her fury on him. She slapped him wildly, her heavy rings catching his lip and tearing the skin. "You used my wedding to sleep with her," Bianca shrieked, hitting him again and again, her voice echoing up to the vaulted ceilings. "You told me that money was for my custom dress, you lying, selfish pig." Geraldine rushed into the fray, shrieking frantically about their reputation and begging the church elders not to look. She grabbed Bianca's arm, trying to drag her screaming daughter back, but Dion accidentally shoved his mother in the chaotic struggle. He sent Geraldine tumbling backward, her arms flailing as she crashed into a massive floral arrangement. The head of church finances, the supposed queen of the local black elite, lay sprawling on the wet marble covered in crushed white roses and spilled liquor. The Davenport family friends and the wealthy church members were actively backing away, pulling out their smartphones to record the spectacular physical destruction of the Wilson family. Their carefully cultivated image of high-class sophistication was entirely dead, and there was no coming back from this level of public ruin. I stepped down from the stage, my custom crimson gown whispering softly against the carpeted steps. Victoria Davenport walked smoothly at my side, completely unbothered by the violent spectacle unfolding a few feet away. I approached Bianca, who was now sitting on the wet floor weeping hysterically, while Dayon stood panting nearby, wiping bright red blood from his torn lip. Bianca looked up at me, her heavy theatrical makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. She expected me to gloat about the ruined wedding, but I had something much more permanent in mind. I looked down at the girl who had spent the last 7 years calling me a lowly bookkeeper and a broke charity case. The perfect golden child. I said, my voice soft but carrying perfectly through the sudden lull in the room. You spent years calling me uneducated. You told all your friends that I was just a tragic charity case who trapped your brother. You paraded around town claiming your sheer brilliance earned you a director-level position at the Sterling Marketing Group just last month. Bianca sniffled, rubbing her eyes in confusion. Sterling was the prestigious marketing firm she had endlessly bragged about. The job she claimed proved her intellectual superiority over me. Do you know who chairs the board of directors at the Sterling Marketing Group? I asked, watching her breath hitch. I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out a stiff plastic card. I dropped it onto the floor right at her feet, so it clattered against the marble. It was a corporate access badge with her name and photo printed clearly on the front. The firm was recently acquired by a larger commercial holding company, I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. My holding company, Bianca. When my human resources department conducted a standard executive audit on all new director-level hires, they found something incredibly interesting. I stepped closer, leaning down so she could hear every single syllable over her own sobbing. You never actually graduated from that expensive private university, did you, Bianca? You failed your senior year and paid someone thousands of dollars to forge your official transcripts. You lied on your resume to get the highest-paying job you have ever held. Bianca began to shake violently, grasping the corporate badge with trembling fingers as the blood completely drained from her face. You are officially fired for gross academic fraud, I whispered. I personally signed your termination order this morning, and I forwarded the fraudulent transcripts to the university's legal department. Your professional career in this city is completely over. A low, stunned murmur swept through the remaining guests as Bianca collapsed into fresh, hysterical sobs, curling into a tight ball on the floor. Geraldine tried to crawl toward her daughter, but the heavy wail of police sirens suddenly pierced the humid night air outside the hotel. The flashing red and blue lights reflected aggressively against the massive ballroom windows, painting the walls in an urgent, chaotic strobe effect. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open again. A squad of uniformed police officers and plainclothes detectives marched into the room, their expressions grim and strictly professional. Geraldine let out a pathetic whimpering sound, crawling backward against the wall. She raised her hands defensively, fully expecting them to arrest her for embezzling the church charity funds. "Please," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "It was just a loan. I swear I was going to pay the church back." Victoria Davenport stood perfectly still, a satisfied smile playing on her lips, anticipating the final ruin of the woman who had tried to scam her powerful family. But the officers did not look at Geraldine. They did not even glance at the weeping Bianca or the bleeding Dayon. The lead detective walked straight past the ruined floral arrangements and stopped directly in front of me. "Nyla Wilson," he stated, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his utility belt. "You are under arrest." I felt a cold, terrible shock of confusion radiate through my chest. "Arrest for what?" I asked, my voice betraying a sliver of genuine surprise as I looked at the officers. The detective grabbed my arm forcefully, pulling it behind my back. "For masterminding a complex money laundering syndicate and executing systemic corporate fraud," he announced, reading me my rights as the cold metal locked tightly around my wrists. The entire ballroom gasped in unison. The wealthy elite of Atlanta, who had been enjoying the drama only moments before now, whispered frantically among themselves. Victoria Davenport took a sudden step back, smoothing her emerald gown, her aristocratic composure fracturing for the first time all evening as she looked at me with deep suspicion. She had formed an alliance with me based on my pristine corporate record, and now she was watching me get hauled away like a common criminal. I spun my head around, trying to comprehend what was happening, and how my own perfectly laid trap had snapped shut on my own ankle. I had spent years analyzing financial law and corporate structuring. My accounts were supposed to be impenetrable. Through the chaotic flashing lights and the sea of shocked faces, I saw Dion. He was standing near the shattered champagne glasses, stepping carefully over the broken crystal. He wiped the blood from his split lip with the back of his hand, examining the crimson stain with an eerie calmness. His tailored suit was ruined, his family was a public disaster, and his mistress had just fled the building, but he was staring directly at me with a sickening, triumphant smirk. He walked slowly toward the center of the room, making sure everyone was watching him. "You spent all this time thinking you were the smartest person in the room, Nyla." He called out, his voice cutting clearly through the noise of the police radios and the sobbing of his mother. "You thought you could just pull the strings and watch us all dance for your amusement? Did you really think you could hide a multi-million-dollar real estate empire from a man who lives in the exact same house? Did you think I was too stupid to notice the corporate mail, the encrypted drives, the late-night phone calls?" I pulled against the handcuffs, but the detective held my arms firmly in place. Dion smiled wider, showing his blood-stained teeth. "You forgot one very important detail. My brilliant wife," he continued, taking another step closer so he could look down at me. "I work at a bank. I am a senior credit manager. I have access to the highest level routing systems and override codes in the state. Did you honestly think I was just blindly signing those lease agreements and transfer documents you put in front of me? I copied your digital signatures months ago. I did not just take out fraudulent loans for custom jewelry and white Bentleys, Nyla. I routed millions of dollars of dirty money from offshore accounts directly through your pristine blind trusts and commercial holding companies. I structured the deposits to look exactly like your standard real estate acquisitions. I framed your entire empire while you were busy trying to ruin my sister's wedding. You are going away for a very long time, Nyla, and as the only free parent left, I am going to be the one taking full custody of our son." The cold metal of the chair dug sharply into my spine as I sat in the sterile interrogation room of the Atlanta Police Precinct. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a relentless, annoying hum, casting a harsh, clinical glare onto the scratched aluminum table in front of me. I adjusted my posture, smoothing the heavy silk fabric of my custom crimson gown. The dress was a masterpiece of haute couture, and it looked entirely out of place in this dreary, windowless box, smelling of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. I did not shed a single tear. I did not sweat a single drop. My pulse remained as steady and rhythmic as a metronome. Through the large two-way mirror dominating the right wall, I could sense the presence of my husband and my mother-in-law. Even through the thick, polarized glass, I knew exactly what they were doing. I knew Dion was standing out there in the dimly lit observation hallway, dabbing at his bleeding lip with a tissue and smiling his arrogant, unearned smile. I knew Geraldine was standing right beside him, probably clinging to his arm and praising her brilliant son for finally putting me in my proper place. They thought they had secured their ultimate victory. They thought they had successfully buried me under a mountain of federal charges so they could comfortably steal my son, take over my penthouse, and drain my assets. Dion always possessed a fatal fundamental flaw. He was profoundly arrogant but severely lacking in actual intelligence. He believed that because I transitioned into real estate investing years ago, I had completely abandoned my previous life and my previous skills. He forgot that before I ever bought my first commercial property, before I ever became a real estate mogul, I spent 8 long, grueling years working as a senior systems architect for a major international cybersecurity firm. He thought his little bank manager override codes were sophisticated. He thought that logging into his bank portal from my home office and routing illicit funds through my personal internet protocol address would create an undeniable digital paper trail pointing straight to me. He truly believed he was the apex predator of white-collar crime, weaving an intricate web that would leave me holding the bag for his spectacular theft. I had watched him do it. Night after night, I had watched him sneak into my home office after he thought I was asleep. I had watched him sweat over his laptop, transferring massive sums of money to cover his sister's vanity and his mother's fraud. I never interrupted him because I was busy building a much larger trap. The heavy metal door of the interrogation room clicked loudly and swung open. The lead detective walked in looking exhausted, irritated, and ready to force a confession. But he was not alone. Right behind him, stepping with the undeniable authority of someone who owned the entire building, walked a tall woman in an immaculate silver-tailored suit. It was my high-powered corporate attorney, Evelyn. She carried a heavy black pelican case in her hands, lugging it with grim determination. She placed the massive protective case directly onto the metal interrogation table and unlatched the heavy plastic clasps. Inside, resting securely in thick, anti-static foam, was a massive server hard drive pulled directly from the main security frame of Dion's bank branch. Evelyn did not even look at the detective before she began speaking. "My client is free to go," she announced, her voice slicing through the heavy air of the interrogation room like a newly sharpened blade. "We have just provided the district attorney and the Federal Banking Commission with the actual encrypted logs of the stolen funds." The detective frowned, crossing his arms and looking back and forth between me and Evelyn. "Your husband provided digital logs showing the money moving directly through your personal home network," he stated, his tone thick with skepticism. "He gave us the routing numbers and the authorization codes tied to your devices." I finally leaned forward, resting my bare hands on the cool metal of the table. I looked directly at the two-way mirror because I knew Dion was standing right on the other side, listening to every single word through the intercom system. "He thought routing dirty money through my home IP address was smart," I said, my voice dangerously calm and echoing slightly in the small room. "I worked in it before I bought my first property. I knew Dion was drowning in secret debt months ago, so I installed a highly classified reverse malware tracker directly onto his personal laptop and his bank-issued mobile device. I tracked every single keystroke he made. I monitored every hidden proxy he used and every fake authorization code he ever typed into his bank's portal." I pointed a manicured finger at the heavy hard drive resting in the case. "He tried to bounce the stolen funds through my local network to create a smokescreen to frame me for his crimes. But my tracker intercepted the final destination routing numbers before he could scrub them from the server. The dirty money entirely bypassed my blind trusts. Dion did not secure the funds for himself. He wired every single stolen dollar directly into an offshore trust account registered in the Cayman Islands under the exact legal name of Bianca Wilson." The detective's face went completely blank as the magnitude of my words sank in. The realization that he had arrested the wrong person and that a massive federal conspiracy had just been dropped into his lap hit him like a physical blow. He looked down at the hard drive and then pulled his police radio from his belt. He muttered a quick, urgent 10 code into the receiver and turned on his heel, marching straight out of the interrogation room. He left the heavy steel door wide open behind him. I stood up slowly, taking my time to smooth the wrinkles from my crimson gown. I picked up my clutch purse and walked deliberately toward the open doorway. Through the glass partition of the observation hallway, I watched the lightning strike exactly as I had planned. Dion was standing near a vending machine, his arrogant smirk completely frozen on his face. The color had violently drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and terrified. The lead detective marched straight up to him, without a single word of warning, grabbing him roughly by the shoulder and slamming him forcefully against the painted cinder block wall. "Dion Wilson, you are under arrest for federal bank fraud, money laundering, and identity theft." The detective barked loudly as he yanked Dion's arms violently behind his back and snapped the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Dion thrashed wildly, his eyes wide with absolute sheer terror. "No," he screamed, his voice cracking and echoing down the long, sterile hallway. "You have the wrong person. It was my wife. You saw the files. Check the IP address again. I am a bank manager. You cannot do this to me." The detective shoved him forward, marching him aggressively down the hallway toward the booking area. Dion kicked and screamed, fighting against the officers like a cornered, desperate rat. His expensive polished shoes scuffed against the cheap linoleum floor as the reality of his situation finally crushed him. He realized his entire life was completely over. He realized his brilliant plan had backfired spectacularly. He was going to federal prison for a very long time, and his precious golden child sister was going down right alongside him as a co-conspirator in an international banking fraud scheme. Geraldine stood in the hallway completely and utterly paralyzed. She watched her golden boy, her brilliant, successful bank manager's son, being dragged away in heavy steel handcuffs. The grand illusion of her high society life, the fake wealth, the church prestige, the Davenport connection, it all shattered into a million irreparable pieces right before her eyes. The social empire she had sacrificed my son's health to build was entirely dead. As I walked out of the interrogation room and stepped into the main hallway, Geraldine suddenly snapped out of her trance. The sight of me standing there free and completely victorious broke whatever tiny shred of sanity she had left. She collapsed onto the dirty precinct floor, dropping to her knees and crawling frantically toward me with dark mascara-stained tears streaming down her face. She lunged forward and desperately grabbed my ankles, her shaking fingers digging into my skin through my gown. "Please, Nyla," she wailed, her voice echoing pitifully off the concrete walls. "Please tell them to stop. Tell them it is a mistake. He is your husband. He is Leo's father. You cannot let them take my boy away from me. He is a good man, Nyla. Please have mercy." I stopped walking. I looked down at the pathetic weeping woman clutching at my feet. This was the woman who had slapped my innocent child in front of 200 people over a piece of cake. This was the woman who had treated me like disposable dirt for 7 long years while secretly living off the wealth I had built. This was the woman who had encouraged her son to steal and lie and cheat just so she could pretend to be better than everyone else. I did not kick her away. I did not yell. I did not cause a scene. I simply leaned down, getting my face mere inches from her ear. The hallway was still loud with Dion's distant screaming from the booking room, but my voice was a deadly, chilling whisper designed for her ears alone. "I am going to tell you a secret, Geraldine." I whispered my words cold, steady, and deliberate. "Dion is not Leo's biological father. I knew your son was completely sterile long before we ever got married, but I needed a pathetic, gullible man to play the role of a husband while I built my real estate empire in absolute peace. I needed a distraction, and Dion was stupid enough to volunteer. Your bloodline ends right here with your criminal son." Geraldine's eyes widened in absolute horrifying realization. The last remaining drop of color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a hollowed-out, terrified corpse. Her hands went entirely limp, sliding slowly off my ankles as she froze in pure, devastating shock. Her mind simply could not process the magnitude of the destruction I had just unleashed upon her entire existence. She had lost her church, her status, her daughter, her son, and now her only grandson. I stood back up, adjusting my posture and brushing a piece of invisible lint from my sleeve. I stepped carefully over her trembling, broken body and walked smoothly out of the police precinct doors, stepping out into the warm, welcoming Atlanta night. The warm Atlanta night air hit my face, but it could not thaw the absolute ice in my veins. Evelyn fell into step beside me as we walked toward the waiting town car. The satisfying image of Geraldine collapsed on the precinct floor played in my mind like a beautiful movie. I knew exactly what broke her. It was not the loss of her church or her social standing. It was the horrifying realization that I knew exactly what she had done to my son. Just 1 hour prior, as she clung to my ankles begging for mercy for her criminal son, I had leaned down and delivered the final fatal blow. I asked her if she thought I was too stupid to figure out why Leo ended up in the emergency room last week fighting for his next breath. Leo has severe asthma. He requires a highly specific, expensive compound medication to keep his airways open. It costs $2,000 a month, and Geraldine had graciously volunteered to be the one to pick it up from the specialty pharmacy every 4 weeks. She played the doting grandmother so perfectly, claiming she just wanted to help ease my burden while I was busy working. But last week, Leo collapsed in the living room, his chest heaving, his lips turning a terrifying shade of blue. The paramedics barely got him stabilized. While sitting in the sterile hospital room watching my tiny boy hooked up to oxygen machines, I looked at his inhaler. The casing was identical, but the serial numbers were slightly off. I sent the cartridge to an independent lab for chemical testing. The results proved Geraldine had been swapping his life-saving medication for a cheap, over-the-counter generic knockoff that cost barely $20. She kept the remaining $1,980 every single month. And what did the mighty matriarch of the Wilson family do with the money she stole from her own grandson's lungs? I tracked the cash deposits straight to a luxury boutique. She used the cash to pay the monthly installments on Bianca's limited edition crocodile Birkin bag. She literally gambled with my child's life so her worthless daughter could parade around Buckhead with a designer purse. When I whispered this horrifying truth into Geraldine's ear on the precinct floor, I felt her entire body seize. I told her I was not just dismantling her financial life. I told her Evelyn had already delivered the lab results, the pharmacy security footage, and the boutique receipts directly to the district attorney. I was officially pressing criminal child endangerment charges against her. She was going to be publicly dragged out of her house in handcuffs for poisoning her own flesh and blood over a handbag. The church ladies might forgive a little financial mismanagement, but the entire city of Atlanta would crucify a grandmother who choked her own grandson for fashion. I slid into the plush leather seat of the town car, Evelyn sitting quietly across from me. We did not speak as the driver pulled away from the curb. There was no need for words. The Wilsons were effectively annihilated. I went home to my secure condominium, kissed Leo's sleeping forehead, and slept sounder than I had in 7 long years. The next morning, the fallout was swift and merciless. The local news stations were already running breaking news banners about the raid at Dion's bank branch. Sources were leaking details about the church embezzlement scandal, and Geraldine's name was being dragged through the mud on every social media platform in the city. The Wilson family legacy was burning to the ground for everyone to see. I was sitting at my kitchen island drinking a cup of green tea when my cell phone vibrated against the marble countertop. The caller ID displayed Bianca's name. I let it ring 3 times before I finally pressed accept, bringing the phone to my ear. I did not say a word. Neela Bianca choked out her voice, a desperate, pathetic wheeze. "Please do not hang up on me, please, I am begging you." I took a slow sip of my tea. "I am listening, Bianca," I said, my voice completely flat. She was hyperventilating, gasping for air, as if she were the one suffering from an asthma attack. "The police are at the house, Nyla," she sobbed hysterically. "They just took Mom away. They put her in the back of a cruiser in handcuffs right in front of the neighbors. It is all over the neighborhood group chats. They are tearing the house apart looking for financial records." "That sounds like a terrible morning, Bianca," I replied, staring out the window at the morning sun. "But I fail to see how this concerns me." "You fired me yesterday, and now Dion is in federal holding," she cried, her voice cracking with sheer terror. "The detectives told Mom they are looking into my offshore accounts next. They know about the Cayman Island Trust, Nyla. They know about the money Dion wired to me. I am going to federal prison. They are going to lock me up, and I cannot go to prison, Nyla. I cannot survive in there." "Then you should have thought about that before you let your mother finance your handbags with my son's medical fund," I said coldly, preparing to end the call. "Wait!" Bianca screamed through the speaker so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I have something you want. I have something that will guarantee Mom and Dion never see the light of day again." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite my disgust. "What could you possibly have that I do not already know about, Bianca?" "The ledger," she whispered, her voice dropping to a frantic hush. "Mom never kept all her secrets on a computer because she did not trust technology. She kept a physical, handwritten ledger. It is a little black leather book where she recorded every single stolen dime, every bribe she paid to the church elders, every scam she ran for the last 10 years. The police are tearing up the study right now, but they will not find it because I took it out of her safe last night when the gala fell apart. I have it with me." My grip on the teacup tightened. A physical confession written in Geraldine's own handwriting detailing a decade of fraud. It was the holy grail of evidence. It would not just put them away, It would ensure they faced maximum sentences without any possibility of parole or plea deals. "And what exactly do you want for this little black book, Bianca?" I asked, leaning forward against the marble counter. "A plane ticket," she sobbed desperately. "I need a first-class ticket out of the state right now. I need cash, and I need your absolute promise that you will not hand over my specific emails to the feds. I will give you the ledger, and I will testify against my own mother and brother in court if I have to, but you have to let me run away. Please, Nyla, I am terrified." She was turning on her own blood. The perfect golden child, the spoiled princess who had looked down on me for years, was now willing to sell her mother and brother straight down the river just to save her own skin. It was poetic, and it was pathetic. "I will meet you in 1 hour," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Bring the ledger to the abandoned warehouse district on the south side, the one your brother tried to sell off last year. Do not tell anyone where you are going, and do not bring anyone with you. If I see a single police cruiser, or if you try to play a game with me, I will personally ensure the feds get every single piece of data tying you to the Cayman accounts." "I understand, Neela. I swear I will be there." Bianca cried, her relief palpable even through the phone. Thank you so much." I ended the call, dropping the phone back onto the counter. I looked at Evelyn, who had just walked into the kitchen carrying a stack of legal briefs. "Was that the sister-in-law?" Evelyn asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," I said, a cold smile finally breaking across my face. "She wants to trade her mother's physical ledger for a plane ticket out of town. She is terrified of federal prison, and she is ready to sing like a bird." Evelyn chuckled softly, shaking her head. "There is absolutely no loyalty among thieves. Are you actually going to give her a ticket out of the state?" I stood up, walking over to the coat rack to grab my keys and my darkest sunglasses. "I am going to give her exactly what she deserves, Evelyn. She wants to run away from her crimes, and I am going to make sure she walks right into the final trap." The Wilson family thought they could break me, but they are about to learn that I do not just break things. I burn them straight to the ground, and I salt the earth so nothing ever grows there again. The rain started falling just as I crossed into the south side of the city. Heavy sheets of water pounded against the windshield of my SUV, washing away the oppressive heat of the day. I drove past rows of abandoned textile factories and crumbling brick warehouses. This was the exact industrial district Dion had tried to quietly sell off last year under a forged shell company. He thought he was a brilliant mastermind orchestrating his secret deals, but he was just playing checkers while I was building the entire board. I steered the heavy vehicle into the dimly lit parking garage. The concrete structure was hollow and echoing, smelling strongly of motor oil and wet dust. I parked in the deepest shadow on the second level and turned off the engine. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of rain drumming against the concrete roof above. I sat in the darkness, letting the calm wash over me. I had orchestrated every single detail of this night. 10 minutes later, a white luxury sedan sped up the ramp. The tires squealed aggressively against the wet concrete, echoing loudly through the empty garage. The car swerved slightly before slamming into park a few yards away from my SUV. The driver's side door flew open, and Bianca stumbled out. She looked absolutely nothing like the polished, arrogant woman who had paraded around the charity gala just 24 hours ago. Her designer trench coat was soaked and wrinkled. She was not wearing her usual expensive heels, but a pair of flat canvas shoes that were currently stepping directly into a puddle of oily water. Her hair was a tangled mess clinging to her pale face. She looked frantically around the dark garage, her eyes wide with pure, unfiltered paranoia. She clutched a small dark object tightly against her chest. I watched her panic for a long moment before I finally pushed open my car door and stepped out into the damp air. Bianca gasped, jumping backward when she saw me emerge from the shadows. She rushed toward me, her breath coming in ragged, frantic gasps. "Neela!" she cried, her voice echoing loudly in the empty space. "Thank God you are here. I thought you were not coming. I thought the feds were following me." She looked over her shoulder, terrified that a SWAT team was hiding behind the concrete pillars. I stood perfectly still, resting my hands in the pockets of my jacket. I do not have time for your theatrics, Bianca, I said, my voice flat and echoing in the damp air. Show me the ledger. Bianca practically shoved the small black book into my hands. It was an old leather-bound journal worn at the edges and smelling faintly of cheap perfume and stale smoke. I opened it under the dim yellow light of the parking garage overhead lamp. The pages were filled with columns of neat cursive handwriting. It was an absolute masterpiece of financial self-incrimination. Geraldine had meticulously recorded every single stolen dollar over the past 10 years. I saw dates, amounts, and the names of the dummy accounts she used. I saw the bribes she paid to the church building committee. I saw the exact transfers Dion had routed for her. It was everything the federal prosecutors needed to ensure Geraldine and Dion never breathed free air again. I closed the book and ran my hand over the cracked leather cover. This is a very interesting piece of literature, Bianca, I said, looking up at her. She was shivering violently, crossing her arms over her chest. I gave you what you wanted, Neela, she pleaded, stepping closer. I gave you the proof. Now give me the ticket. You promised me a first-class flight out of the state. You promised you would not give my emails to the feds. I need the ticket right now. I tilted my head, studying the desperate woman standing in front of me. You realize giving me this book guarantees your mother will die in a federal penitentiary, I asked her, keeping my tone conversational. Bianca did not even hesitate. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, selfish survival. Mom forced me to do it. She sobbed hysterically, her voice shrill and echoing. She made me take that money. She told Dayon to drain your accounts and funnel the cash into my offshore trust. I did not want any part of this, Nyla. I am a victim here. She manipulated all of us. She is a toxic, evil woman, and she deserves whatever happens to her. I just wanted a normal life, but she dragged me into her scams. Just give me the ticket, and I will testify to whatever you want. I will tell the judge she orchestrated the entire thing. I will say she forced Dion to frame you. Just let me leave. She was so completely willing to throw her own flesh and blood into the fire. The unbreakable bond of the Wilson family was nothing but a fragile illusion built entirely on greed and vanity. The moment their survival was threatened, they turned into starving animals, ready to eat each other alive. I looked at Bianca and let a slow, cold smile spread across my face. You are right, Bianca, I said softly. She is a toxic, evil woman, and she did manipulate you. But there is just one tiny problem with your plan to run away and leave her holding the bag. Bianca froze, her eyes darting between me and my vehicle. What problem? She asked, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. What do you mean, Nyla? Where is my ticket? I did not reach into my pocket for a plane ticket. Instead, I reached behind me and pressed a small button on the key fob hidden in my hand. The mechanical hum of a heavy window motor echoed loudly through the quiet parking garage. The tinted rear window of my SUV slowly rolled down, revealing the dark interior of the back seat. Bianca stared at the lowering glass, her breath catching in her throat. Sitting in the back of my vehicle, perfectly still and shrouded in the shadows of the garage, was Geraldine. I had sent Evelyn to post her massive bail anonymously just 2 hours ago. I had my private security team pick her up from the county jail and bring her straight to this parking garage. She had been sitting in the back of my car the entire time, listening through the cracked window as her precious, beloved golden child sold her out to save herself. Geraldine slowly turned her head to look at her daughter. The older woman looked completely broken. She was wearing the wrinkled clothes she had been arrested in, and her face was pale and hollow. But as she looked at Bianca, the sheer devastation in her eyes rapidly transformed into a violent, boiling rage. You selfish, ungrateful little rat! Geraldine spat, the words tumbling from her mouth like poison. Bianca stumbled backward, her hands flying to her mouth in absolute horror. Mom, she gasped, shaking her head in denial. Mom, I did not mean it. I was just saying whatever I had to say to get the ticket, I swear. Geraldine did not wait for her to finish the pathetic excuse. She threw open the heavy door of the SUV and lunged out into the damp garage. The older woman hit the concrete with surprising speed. She charged at her daughter, screaming at the top of her lungs. I gave you everything, Geraldine roared, her voice echoing violently off the concrete walls. I stole for you. I lied for you. I let my son ruin his entire life just so you could pretend to be somebody important, and you sell me out to this woman for a plane ticket. Bianca raised her hands, trying to back away, but Geraldine was already upon her. The matriarch of the Wilson family grabbed her daughter by the lapels of her expensive trench coat and shoved her forcefully against the side of the white luxury sedan. Bianca shrieked, dropping her arms and shoving her mother back. "Do not touch me!" Bianca screamed, her own anger finally breaking through the panic. "You ruined my life. You are the reason I'm going to jail. You and your stupid, greedy scams." They descended into absolute madness. The grand illusion of their perfect aristocratic family bond was utterly obliterated right there in the oily puddles of the parking garage. Geraldine slapped Bianca across the face, the sharp crack echoing loudly. Bianca shrieked and grabbed a handful of her mother's hair, yanking it violently. They fell against the wet concrete, clawing and tearing at each other like wild dogs. They rolled through the dirty water, ruining their clothes, scraping their knees, and screaming unspeakable insults at one another. All the hidden resentments, the toxic jealousy, the pure, unadulterated selfishness that had always defined their relationship finally erupted into physical violence. They were tearing each other apart piece by piece, punishing each other for the inevitable downfall they had brought upon themselves. I stood a few feet away, watching them destroy what little remained of their dignity. I did not try to stop them. I did not call out to them. I simply watched the inevitable conclusion of a family built entirely on lies and deception. They were so consumed with hurting each other that they completely forgot I was even there. I turned my back on the pathetic scene. I walked calmly over to my SUV and climbed into the driver's seat. I placed the little black leather ledger securely on the passenger seat, right next to my purse. It felt heavy, with the weight of absolute justice. I started the engine, the deep rumble of the motor momentarily drowning out the sound of Bianca and Geraldine screaming at each other on the cold, wet concrete. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the shadows. As my headlights swept across the lower level of the parking garage, they briefly illuminated the two women wrestling in the dirt. Geraldine had Bianca pinned against the bumper of the sedan, and Bianca was wildly kicking at her mother's shins. They looked pathetic, small, and entirely broken. I did not tap the horn or look back in the rearview mirror. I drove down the concrete ramp and merged onto the dark, wet streets of the city. The rain was falling harder now, washing the grime from the streets as I navigated back toward the city center. I turned on the heater, feeling the warm air blast against my legs. I felt completely at peace. The chaotic noise of the Wilsons was finally behind me, silenced by their own catastrophic greed. I drove through the quiet city, holding the steering wheel with a relaxed grip. The leather-bound ledger sat beside me, serving as a silent witness to the complete eradication of my enemies. I had the fraudulent bank records, I had the reverse malware tracking logs, I had the proof of medical tampering, and now I had the handwritten confession of the mastermind herself. The trap was completely sealed. There was no escape hatch left for any of them. I smiled as the glowing skyline of Atlanta came into view through the rain-streaked windshield. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp was Dion's formal sentencing and our official asset division hearing in federal court. He was going to stand before a federal judge and try to explain why he should not spend the next 20 years in a maximum security prison. He was going to watch me take absolute legal ownership of his son, his properties, and his freedom. I pulled into the secure underground garage of my luxury condominium building and parked in my private spot. I gathered my things, holding the black ledger tightly against my side. Tomorrow the judge would bring the gavel down. Tomorrow the Wilson family name would become a cautionary tale whispered in the dark corners of the city. I walked toward the private elevator, ready to sleep and prepare for the final performance. The board was set, the pieces were captured, and the final nail in the coffin was ready to be driven home. The morning sun broke through the heavy rain clouds, casting a brilliant golden light over the Atlanta skyline. I woke up feeling entirely rested. my mind sharp and my spirit completely unburdened. The heavy weight that had rested on my chest for the past 7 years was entirely gone. Today was the day of absolute reckoning. I dressed with meticulous care, choosing an immaculate tailored ivory suit that symbolized my complete vindication. I paired it with pearl earrings and a pair of designer stilettos that clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor of my penthouse. I checked on Leo, who was sleeping soundly, his breathing steady and easy now that the toxic influence of his grandmother was securely locked away in a county jail cell. I kissed his forehead and promised him that by the time he woke up, his world would be entirely safe forever. Evelyn met me in the lobby of my building, her face set in a mask of grim determination. She carried a thick leather briefcase packed with the final instruments of our victory. We rode in the back of the town car in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up around us. As we pulled up to the federal courthouse, the scene outside was absolute chaos. News vans were parked along the entire block with reporters and camera crews swarming the wide concrete steps. The spectacular downfall of a prominent banking manager and his seemingly perfect high society family had become the most sensational story in the state. I stepped out of the vehicle and the flashbulbs immediately blinded me. Reporters shouted questions, asking for a statement about my husband's arrest and my mother-in-law's shocking criminal charges. I did not look at them. I did not speak a single word. I walked up the courthouse steps with the absolute unbothered grace of a woman who had already won the war. The interior of the federal courthouse smelled of polished oak, old paper, and severe judgment. We made our way to the assigned courtroom on the 4th floor, pushing through the heavy wooden doors. The gallery was already packed. I saw former friends, members of Geraldine's church congregation, and local socialites who had once looked down their noses at me. They were all sitting there leaning forward in their uncomfortable wooden pews, hungry for the final destruction of the Wilson family. I took my seat at the front of the room, perfectly composed, placing my hands neatly in my lap. A heavy silence fell over the room as the side door opened and 2 armed federal marshals escorted Dion into the courtroom. The sight of him was almost physically jarring. The arrogant, polished man who used to strut through country clubs in custom-tailored Italian suits was completely gone. In his place stood a hollow, terrified shell of a human being. He was wearing a shapeless, bright orange prison jumpsuit that swallowed his shrinking frame. The heavy steel chains around his waist and ankles clanked loudly in the quiet room, echoing with every pathetic, shuffling step he took. His skin looked gray and sickly. His hair was unkempt and deep purple bags hung heavily beneath his bloodshot eyes. He looked exactly like what he truly was, a desperate cornered criminal facing the absolute end of his existence. Dion was led to the defense table, sitting just a few feet away from me. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. The sheer terror radiating from his face was palpable. He knew his mother was in jail. He knew his sister had sold them all out in a wet parking garage the night before. He knew his offshore accounts had been seized and his assets were entirely frozen. He had absolutely nothing left to bargain with. The federal prosecutor had already laid out the overwhelming mountain of evidence proving his banking fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. This was his sentencing and asset division hearing, and the judge was allowing victims to make their final statements before the gavel fell. Dion leaned toward me across the small gap between our tables. The marshals stepped forward to stop him, but the judge raised a hand allowing him to speak. Dion's eyes were welling with tears, his hands shaking violently against the wood of the table. "Nyla," he whispered, his voice a broken, pathetic rasp that carried through the silent courtroom. "Nyla, I messed up. I know I messed up so badly. But we built a life together. We have a history. Please, you have to stop this. Do not tear a black father away from his son. Leo needs me. You cannot let my boy grow up without his father in his life. I will do whatever you want, Nyla. Just please give me one more chance. Please have mercy." I stared at him, watching the tears slide down his sunken cheeks. It was the most despicable performance I had ever witnessed. He was trying to weaponize race and fatherhood to save his own skin. He was trying to play the card of a devoted family man, tearing at my sympathy by using the very child he had completely neglected. He stood there, begging for mercy in the name of a son whose medical fund he had allowed his mother to steal. He dared to speak Leo's name after letting Geraldine replace life-saving asthma medication with cheap knockoffs just to buy luxury handbags for Bianca. He had the absolute unmitigated audacity to ask for a second chance. I did not yell at him. I did not sneer or show a single ounce of anger. I simply looked at him with eyes as cold and deep as a frozen ocean. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my ivory suit. I walked to the witness stand, the rhythmic clicking of my heels echoing in the cavernous room. I raised my right hand and swore to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. The judge, a stern older man with a face carved from stone, looked down at me from his elevated bench. "Mrs. Wilson," the judge said, his voice booming through the microphone, "you have the floor to make your victim impact statement and present any final documentation regarding the division of assets and requested restitution." I nodded politely. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single neatly folded piece of paper. It was not a bank statement. It was not a wire transfer log. It was something far more sinister. I handed the document to the court bailiff, who walked it over to the judge's bench. The entire courtroom watched in absolute breathless silence. Dion strained his neck, trying to see what piece of paper I had just surrendered to the court. I could see the confusion and rising panic in his bloodshot eyes. "Your Honor," I said, my voice perfectly steady and projecting clearly through the speakers. "My husband just asked me for a second chance. He just begged me not to tear a father away from his son. He claims we built a life together and that he made a mistake out of financial desperation. But that document proves his intentions were never just about stealing my money." The judge adjusted his glasses, staring down at the paper. The color seemed to drain from his face as his eyes scanned the typed words and the signatures at the bottom. He looked up at Dion with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. 3 months ago, I continued turning my body so I was facing Dion directly. 3 months ago, my husband secretly took out a massive life insurance policy on me. He forged my signature on the medical declarations and the consent forms. He used his credentials as a bank manager to bypass the standard verification protocols. He insured my life for $10 million. But what is truly remarkable, Your Honor, is the specific rider he attached to the policy. The gallery was completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpeted floor. Dion's face went entirely white, his jaw dropping open in silent horror. He specifically tripled the payout. "In the event of my accidental death," I stated, letting the words hang heavily in the cold air of the courtroom. He spent weeks searching the internet from his office computer, looking up untraceable poisons and brake line tampering. He was planning an accident. He was planning to end my life so he could collect $30 million and completely clear his secret debts. Dion began to shake his head wildly, his chains rattling against the wooden table. "No," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "No, Nyla, please, no." I stepped closer to the microphone, my eyes locking onto his terrified face. "And do you know who he listed as the secondary beneficiary on that policy?" "Your Honor," I asked the judge. "He did not list our son Leo. He specifically bypassed any blind trusts or accounts tied to his own child. He listed his sister, Bianca Wilson, as the sole recipient of the funds if he were unable to claim them." A collective gasp ripped through the gallery. The sheer calculated evil of the plan was almost impossible for normal people to comprehend. He was going to murder the mother of his child and give the blood money to his spoiled sister so she could continue pretending to be wealthy. "You did not want a second chance, Dion," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence like a surgical blade. "You wanted me dead so you could fund your sister's fake luxury lifestyle. You wanted me buried in the ground so your mother could keep playing the grand matriarch of a church she was robbing blind. You did not care about Leo. You did not care about building a life. You only cared about feeding the endless parasitic greed of the Wilson family." Dion collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his manacled hands. He let out a loud, agonizing wail, a sound of complete and utter defeat. He was sobbing uncontrollably, his shoulders heaving under the orange fabric. The defense attorney sitting next to him slowly moved his chair away, as if Dion's presence was suddenly physically repulsive. Even his own legal counsel could not stomach the absolute depravity of what had just been revealed. I turned back to the judge standing tall and immaculate. I am asking the court to grant me full and immediate ownership of all remaining untainted assets, to completely sever any parental rights this man claims to possess, and to ensure he is locked in a cage where he can never threaten my life or my child's life ever again. The judge stared at the document in his hands for a long, terrible moment. The heavy silence in the courtroom was suffocating, broken only by the sound of Dion's pathetic sobbing. The judge finally looked up, his eyes dark with a fury I had never seen in a courtroom before. He looked at Dion with the kind of contempt usually reserved for the absolute worst monsters of society. "Mr. Wilson," the judge said, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage, "in all my years on the federal bench, I have seen greed, I have seen fraud, and I have seen theft. But the sheer sociopathic depravity of your actions, the calculated intent to murder your own wife and leave your child motherless simply to fund a lavish lifestyle for your family, is beyond comprehension. You are a danger to society, and you are a profound disgrace to humanity." The judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel. He held it in the air, the polished wood gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The final nail in the coffin was hovering right above Dion's head. Dion looked up, his face soaked in tears, his mouth open in a silent scream of terror. He knew his life was over. He knew the sentence that was about to fall from the judge's lips would ensure he never saw the sky outside a prison yard again. The judge slammed the gavel down against the sounding block with a violent, deafening crack that echoed like a gunshot through the massive room. The sound signaled the absolute permanent end of Dion Wilson and his entire parasitic family. The sentencing was about to be handed down, and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that it would be absolutely merciless. The heavy wooden gavel struck the block with a finality that made the entire courtroom flinch. Judge Carter did not break eye contact with Dion as the sharp sound faded into the sterile air of the room. 10 years, the judge announced, his voice booming through the microphone and echoing off the polished oak walls. 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. You will serve every single day of that sentence, Mr. Wilson, for the absolute terror and betrayal you inflicted upon your own family. Dion collapsed entirely, his knees giving out as the two armed federal marshals caught him under his armpits. He let out a guttural, agonizing wail that sounded like a dying animal. He thrashed against the heavy steel chains binding his wrists and ankles, but his weak, frantic movements were completely useless against the sheer strength of the guards. They hauled him backward, dragging his expensive leather shoes across the cheap carpet of the courtroom floor. "Nyla, please!" he screamed, his voice cracking and breaking as tears streamed down his sunken face. "Please do not let them take me. I am sorry. I am so sorry I messed up. But we built a life together. Do not tear a black father away from his son. Give me one more chance." I sat perfectly still in my tailored ivory suit, watching him being dragged toward the heavy iron doors at the back of the courtroom. My face was an unreadable mask of cold indifference. I did not blink. I did not offer a single tear. I simply watched the man who had plotted to end my life being erased from society. Earlier, when I took the stand, I did not yell or scream or cause a scene. I simply submitted one final piece of paper into evidence. It was a life insurance policy on my life for $10 million. Dion had secretly forged my signature and added a specific rider to triple the payout in the event of my accidental death. He had listed his sister Bianca as the secondary beneficiary, bypassing our son entirely. I had looked him dead in the eye and told him he did not want a second chance. He just wanted me dead so he could fund his sister's fake luxury lifestyle. Now the heavy iron doors slammed shut behind him, cutting off his pathetic cries and leaving a heavy, satisfying silence in their wake. The judge then turned his attention to the thick stack of financial documents Evelyn had provided. The division of assets was completely merciless and perfectly orchestrated. The court ordered the immediate freezing and transfer of every single account tied to the Wilson family name. The judge granted me absolute sole legal and physical custody of Leo, stripping Dion of any parental rights forever. But the true masterpiece of the morning was the handling of Geraldine's estate. I had spent the last 3 months quietly purchasing the debt on Geraldine's sprawling suburban home through a series of anonymous blind trusts. She thought she owned that gaudy monument to her fake wealth, but she had secretly mortgaged it to the hilt to pay for her church donations and country club dues. The judge looked down at Geraldine, who was sitting in the gallery, looking like a shriveled, terrified ghost. "Mrs. Wilson," the judge said, staring directly at her, "you are hereby ordered to vacate the premises of your home by 5 o'clock this evening. The property legally belongs to your daughter-in-law, and she has filed for an immediate eviction. Furthermore, I am granting a permanent restraining order against you. You are forbidden from coming within 1,000 feet of Neela or her son Leo for the rest of your natural life. If you violate this order, you will join your son in federal custody." Geraldine gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically shot. The remaining members of her church congregation, who had come to watch the spectacle, visibly recoiled from her sliding down the wooden pews to distance themselves from a convicted child abuser. She had nothing left. Her social empire was completely decimated, and she was about to be thrown out onto the street. And then there was Bianca. The federal prosecutors had kept their promise to me. They did not offer Bianca a plea deal that allowed her to escape her own consequences. Her offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands were entirely seized and drained to pay the massive restitution she owed. She was left completely bankrupt, with a felony fraud conviction permanently attached to her name. Her wealthy friends from Buckhead blocked her number, and the country clubs permanently revoked her memberships. With absolutely zero skills and a criminal record, Bianca was forced to take the only job that would hire her to pay off her court-ordered debts. The very venue where she had tried to host her fake luxury charity gala just a few weeks prior was now her place of employment. But she was not walking through the front doors in a designer gown. She was walking through the service entrance wearing a rubber apron and a hairnet. She spent 12 hours a day standing over a steaming industrial sink, scrubbing baked-on grease-off plates, while the wealthy women she used to mock dined in the ballroom above her. Her expensive manicures were ruined, her hands raw and blistered from the harsh chemical soaps. She was a dishwasher, drowning in the pathetic reality of her new permanent existence. The legal proceedings concluded, and the courtroom slowly emptied. I took my time gathering my things, letting Evelyn handle the final paperwork. When I finally walked out through the heavy glass doors of the federal building, the bright morning sun had given way to a sudden torrential downpour. The sky was a dark, bruised gray, and cold rain was washing over the concrete steps in heavy sheets. My chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce was idling smoothly at the curb, the sleek black paint gleaming under the harsh streetlights. As I walked down the steps under the shelter of a large black umbrella held by my security guard, I saw her. Geraldine was standing on the sidewalk just outside the perimeter of the courthouse. She was soaking wet, her thin clothes plastered to her frail, shaking body. The mascara she had carefully applied that morning was running down her cheeks in dark, ugly rivers. She was clutching a black plastic garbage bag to her chest, containing the few meager items of clothing the marshals had allowed her to pack before officially locking her out of her foreclosed home. She looked like a drowned rat, completely stripped of her pride and her precious status. When she saw me approaching the luxurious car, her face twisted into a mask of pure, desperate hatred. She stumbled forward, the rain beating down on her head. "Nyla." She screamed, her voice completely raw and cracking over the sound of the storm. "You evil, vindictive witch! You took everything from me. You took my son, You took my daughter. You took my home. God will punish you for what you have done to this family." My security guard stepped forward to block her path, but I raised my hand to stop him. I stepped into the spacious climate-controlled interior of the Rolls-Royce, letting the soft plush leather envelop me. I settled into the seat and signaled my driver. The engine purred to life, silent and powerful. I pressed the chrome button on the door panel, and the thick tinted windows smoothly glided down just a few inches. The cold, damp air rushed into the car, bringing the smell of wet asphalt and Geraldine's cheap perfume. She rushed to the window, pressing her wet face near the opening, still sobbing and cursing my name. I looked at her with a calm, devastating emptiness. There was absolutely no toxic forgiveness in my heart. There was no high road left to take. I had completely dismantled her life piece by piece, and I wanted her to know exactly why she was standing in the rain with nothing but a trash bag. "The day you slapped my son over a piece of cake, you forfeited your right to be treated like a human being," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, chilling whisper that cut straight through the noise of the pouring rain. "Enjoy the gutter, Geraldine." I did not wait for her response. I pressed the button, and the thick tinted glass silently rolled up, completely cutting off her pathetic wailing. The cabin of the Rolls-Royce returned to a state of absolute perfect silence. I leaned back against the headrest and let out a long, slow breath. I turned my head to look at the other side of the spacious back seat. Leo was sitting there, strapped securely into his plush leather booster seat. He was not wheezing. He was not coughing or struggling for breath. His cheeks were rosy and his eyes were bright and full of life. The expensive medication flowing through his lungs was working perfectly, keeping him healthy and strong. Resting on a silver tray locked onto the fold-out table in front of him was a massive 5-tier slice of custom chocolate cake. It was a masterpiece of culinary art baked specifically for him by a private French chef I had hired that very morning. It was decorated with spun sugar gold leaf and thick layers of imported ganache. Leo looked up at me with a wide, happy smile, his face smeared with rich, dark chocolate. "Is the bad lady gone, Mommy?" he asked, his sweet voice completely clear and steady. "Yes, baby," I said, reaching out to gently wipe a crumb from his chin. "The bad lady is gone forever. She can never hurt you again." Leo giggled and took another massive bite of his cake, swinging his little legs happily. I turned to face the front, pulling my custom silk jacket tight around my shoulders. My pulse was steady, and my heart was incredibly light. The driver put the car in gear, and the heavy vehicle pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving Geraldine behind in the cold, sweeping rain. As we drove, the dark storm clouds ahead began to break apart. A brilliant shaft of golden sunlight pierced through the gray, illuminating the wet streets of the city. The Rolls-Royce glided forward effortlessly, carrying us away from the wreckage of the past and into a bright, untouchable future. There was no lingering guilt, no remorse, and absolutely no toxic forgiveness. There was only pure, unadulterated justice and the sweet taste of total victory. The greatest lesson we can take from this story is that toxic forgiveness is a myth, and you never owe your peace to people who actively try to destroy you. Family is supposed to be a safe haven, but when blood relatives become your biggest enemies, the most powerful thing you can do is set absolute boundaries and walk away. True victory is not just about bringing bad people to justice, but about protecting your own energy and building a beautiful life entirely on your own terms. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? Tell us your story in the comments below and subscribe for more stories of ultimate revenge.